Bibliophiles of the internet, my name is Audrey, and today I'm back to give you 5 reasons to read Felix Ever After by Kacen Callender because holy crap, this is a game-changing book. Felix Ever After is an Ownvoices queer contemporary story about Felix Love, a black queer trans teen artist attending an arts-focused high school in New York, and he's afraid that when people look at him, they see someone who's too much work, and that makes him feel like he'll never fall in love or find happiness. When someone at school publicly outs him and dead names him and then starts sending him anonymous transphobic messages online, Felix decides to create a fake Instagram account to try and catch whoever might be behind it. But obviously, it gets complicated, and this catfish scheme ends up landing Felix in this weird quasi-love triangle he did not expect. Content warnings for incurred homophobia and transphobia, public outing, off-the-page dead naming, on-the-page misgendering, both intentional and unintentional, online harassment, confronting TERF ideologies in supporting characters, underage drinking and drug use, and some exploration of parental abandonment. First things first, there will be some Ownvoices reviews for Felix Ever After included down below because we should definitely be valuing those voices the most when we talk about this book. Full disclosure, when I looked for Ownvoices reviews, and I looked for a very long time across many different resources and platforms, channels, and blogs, I could not find very many, which seems like it has to be a mistake. So I wanted to clarify here that this review you're currently watching is Ownvoices in the sense that I am a queer and trans Latinx person, but obviously I cannot speak to Felix's blackness, so I've tried to find some folks down below who can. So reason number 1 to read this book is that the story really gives Felix space to be messy and make mistakes. So often there's this expectation that teenagers have to have their whole lives laid out and have to know everything about themselves. We hardly ever take into account that the act of becoming is a never-ending process. Felix is lost, he's confused, he judges other people, he holds himself against these impossible standards, and he is filled to the brim with self-doubt. He doesn't always know how to express his emotions in the most productive way. He often gives into this urge to hurt the world the way the world has hurt him, and he doesn't know what to make of any of it. There was a really brilliant moment early on in the story where Felix's best friend Ezra is telling him that this catfish scheme might be going too far, and Felix's response is, I get to say what's too far. I'm the one who was hurt. You don't get to tell me what to do with my pain or how I should react. There's agency there. And when we talk about agency, especially in regards to young folks, there's this assumption that you have the agency to make the right choice. But that's not true. Agency is a two-way street, and you have the agency to make mistakes. Felix is so messy and makes so many bad choices in this story, but it's refreshing to have a character who's allowed to be imperfect and to learn from those choices, and also to see that you are not unlovable just because you've made mistakes. It's so obvious to me that this story came from such a close and unfiltered place, and as a queer and trans person, it really spoke to all the self-doubt I've experienced myself growing up, and even now as an adult. Related to that, reason number 2 is that this story really sits in and challenges this idea that there's only one way for trans folks to be good enough and real enough, when that is definitely not the case. We live in a world where the most commonly told story about queer folks in the media and film and television shows and everything is what I like to call the I've always known narrative, which is the most palatable narrative for cis and heteronormative folks because it doesn't seem to leave any room for argument. But obviously there are so many different kinds of queer experiences, and a lot of people don't have the knowledge or agency to put words to their queerness until much later in life, but that doesn't make them any less. But because that's the story that gets told most often, you see that Felix is almost weirdly jealous of people who came out or transitioned much earlier in life, people who were able to change their name, their pronouns, their presentation at a very young age, while he, on the other hand, has taken almost his entire life to realize that he's trans. And when that's your situation, which I can kind of speak to, it's easy to feel like you've wasted all this time and you spent so many years basically living a lie, as if you failed in your queerness or your transness. When in reality, it's really an indication of how spectacularly society has failed us and continues to fail incoming generations by not equipping us with the words, language, vocabulary, and knowledge to explore our identities from the outset. Felix is feeling like he's not really a binary trans person, which is totally valid, but he doesn't know the other options. He hardly knows that there's more than one way to be trans. And I really appreciate that this story allows him to continue exploring and questioning until he finds the way that is his. And even then, showing us that if he wants to continue exploring, that is his right. Reason number 3 is that this story celebrates the beauty and importance of second chances. You know I love to talk parallels, and there are some great ones in this story, especially with Felix struggling to start his art portfolio for prospective colleges, creating this fake Instagram account, and still figuring out what it means for him to be trans. I see his hesitation towards all these things connecting back to this deeply ingrained fear and doubt trans folks have that they need to get it exactly right the first time, or else society might view them as being less valid or less legitimate. Felix is having trouble moving forward with all these things because he's terrified to get it wrong, and he's afraid that if he doesn't make the quote-unquote right choice, he won't be afforded a second chance. This is especially true when you think about all the white cishet folks out there who get to make as many mistakes as they want and just be terrible people in general without ever facing any kind of consequences. But as soon as anyone else makes any kind of mistake, it's very hard for them to come back from that and win back that trust. That insecurity is a huge thing for trans folks, especially in relation to changing their names or presentation or even just finding a label for themselves. We convince ourselves that one major transition of some kind or another is enough of a burden to the people around us, and then we don't allow ourselves space to evolve, which is wild because your identity and your sense of self is always evolving. It's never stagnant. Felix has so much anxiety about his art, about not messing up on this catfish plan, and trying to figure out who he is because he's afraid that the world will not hear him if he messes up. And that's a message that's reinforced for young trans folks in so many ways. It is so important to see him learning that you don't just get one shot at being yourself, and that if you make a mistake, you have the space to make it right. And nobody can take that away. Reason number 4 is how this story explores Felix gravitating towards his pain over his joy, and how deeply ingrained that instinct really is. Like I said, Felix makes a lot of mistakes. He hurts a lot of people and is hurt by a lot of people, and he both consciously and unconsciously leans towards people and things he knows will hurt him, and there's a reason for that. Queer and trans POC especially are taught so early on to connect with their pain over their own joy, to prioritize and make space for all the ways we will inevitably get hurt, almost as if to say, this is what the world has in store for you most often, so you might as well get used to it. Felix is definitely going through that. You see it in his non-relationship with his estranged mom, the way he tolerates bad behavior from people in his own friend group, the way he actively responds to his own harasser, and even the way he keeps himself from working on his art, because deep down he does not believe that he is owed success or happiness. We learn how to self-sabotage, how to factor ourselves out of the equation, and actively keep ourselves away from hope and joy, because the world tries to teach us again and again that there's only pain, failure, loss, and exclusion in store for us, when this could not be further from the truth. It's the great lie that society tries to feed us, and Felix Ever After takes that head on and challenges that concept. Over the course of the story, Felix is learning that he is worthy of love and happiness, that those things are within his reach, especially because of the people around him. The door is open for him, he just has to find the strength to walk through. And reason number 5 is that this story celebrates the power and importance of self-determination. Kind of going back to all these issues I've touched on so far, a lot of these things cause Felix distress because they make him feel small and powerless. He's confronting self-doubt, he's being harassed by this random person on the internet insisting that he's not who he says he is, and he feels like there's very little he can do about those things. As the story continues, he's experiencing a shift in perspective where he's coming to realize that these things are keeping him from focusing on himself. They're taking away the energy he needs to work on himself and accomplish his goals, and it would be a much better use of his time to focus on what he can control and what he can change. Felix is connecting more with the people around him, and he's learning to attune himself to the things that bring him joy, and it's such a powerful reclamation of personal, emotional, and mental space. This story shows us the importance and value of reclaiming your space, your power, your time, your sense of self, and realizing that the only person who can grant you those things is you and no one else. To see Felix coming full circle and deciding this is the label that's right for me, this is the project that's right for me, this is the person that's right for me, I have no better words to describe it other than to say it is pure catharsis. There is power in claiming what is true to you, and when all is said and done, that's really what's at the very heart of this book. So those are just 5 reasons to read Felix Ever After among many. It's a story that feels so real and so close, and there are so many complicated moving parts parts that just hang together and really work when it almost seems like they shouldn't. It's an amazing story and it's an absolute game changer. If you're on the fence or if you've only just heard of it, I highly recommend it. As always, if you've read Felix Ever After yourself or if you would like to in the future, I would love to know what you think in the comments below so we can discuss. But besides that, I've actually decided to keep the outro from my last video because I enjoyed it so much. So I will say until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.